Israeli. Yali. We thought that we've sometimes focused on one teaching or an idea or something to discuss. And we were wrestling, should we dedicate our Tish to a discussion around Israel?
The Aliyah. And so they'll auction that off so that somebody can make that, and you raise your hand. You can, sometimes the Gabbai will ask, how much are you making? And they'll jot it down in their, on what you shared. So, let me go check with the board real quick what we need to do. Comes back a few minutes later. I checked with the board. We accept the $100,000 donations, but for the $100,000, you can put any verse that you want. By seeing it, it might be reminding you of something later on in the day that you can act in a different way or do something. And so the texts, I don't know where they are on here, but the text that I talked about that evening was one from...
So just a little different version of it, a way of looking at it, but I love that too. You can add your thoughts of these texts at any time as well, or your questions about them, or anything else for that matter. I love the second text on the first page. Lo lecha hamlecha ligmor, v'lo ata ben chorin lebatel b'mena. Question: teach me everything there is to know about Judaism while standing on one foot. And Hillel says, do not do to another as you would not want done to yourself. Right? The golden rule in a sense. All the rest is commentary. Go and study. That's all Judaism, right? Do to others as you want to you, but a difference. Why do it? And what Hillel and Shammai agree on in this teaching is that we are still obligated to do good. That even if it doesn't change the world, it doesn't stop right now what we do in our lives. And so that connects to me this text, Lo lecha hamlecha ligmor. It's not your duty to finish the task, but you're not allowed to stop from trying to finish it. Well, we're not going to get there, but we got to still try. That's why I want you to go with me in a couple weeks on October 7th to Life Remodeled to help area in Detroit, and that's Shir Shalom's afternoon at 12 o'clock. And we've been doing this for, I think, Melanie, you're the first who brought it to us. And it was 5 years ago? Yeah, and so we've gone with a small number, a dozen, 20 people sometimes. It's great. It's hard work. You have to be 14 or older to go, but it's good. We're cleaning up. We're using power tools. It's like the ones, like why does a Jew own power tools? Sukkot, because usually for cleaning things up, that's not what we do. So he does. But anyway, so just an idea. So your turn.
On the back page, or the last page, page 3, I guess. Is there a fourth? There is. Page 3 then. There are a couple that are kind of connected. That when we talk about the story of creation, there's two different texts that are on here from the story of Genesis. The first one in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, where it says that we're created b'tselem Elohim. That idea of that we're each created in the image of God. And I connect that with Genesis 2:7, which is the third text that's on that page as well, where it says, God formed Adam, humanity, blowing into his nostrils the breath of life. The human became a living being. Adam became a living being. To me, those are connected, one, because of the story of creation, but because of the message that we can take away from them as well and the way that the rabbis interpreted it. One, that every one of us, with that first idea of being created b'tselem Elohim, every one of us has a spark of the divine within us. And oftentimes, it's easy to say and look at other people and not think of them as human. Or that we belittle somebody else, or we find something negative about them that we can point out and that we highlight. This text challenges us to say, find that divine spark within them. That everybody has something godly in them and that we need to look for it. There's a blessing that's actually said. There's a tradition that when you see somebody that, it's described in different ways in different Sidurim, that somebody either that they say is deformed or ugly, that you say a blessing. And the blessing is that God created that person in God's image. And I know that we did a training for the staff that was going out at Camp Tamarack on some of their Western trips. We did a training with them that I got to sit on, and they gave them all sorts of different texts to be able to use with the kids to inspire them. And that was one of the texts was, their challenge was to find somebody that wasn't beautiful in their eyes to be able to recite this blessing. It sounds worse than it is because we use that to then talk about, well, what's this message behind it? We don't want the kids going out there and looking for somebody that they're going to say, oh, there's that ugly person. I need to now say a blessing over them. But it was the idea of what's that blessing saying? It's saying that every individual has beauty within them. And that if you don't recognize that yet, it's your obligation to find that with them. And that blessing reminds us of that. That second quote of the text of Adam being created by the breath of God is interpreted to understand that we all come from, later on in the prophets it says, we all come from one Father, referring to God. But we all come from the same place, that we come from God, and that we all trace our lineage back to Adam. And the idea behind that is that we're all equal. There's no race, no group of people, no ethnicity, no nationality that's better than anybody else because of their lineage. We all trace ourselves back to that first human being, to Adam. And so to me, those messages of equality and finding the spark of the divine is an important one that I think our world needs at times.
Yali?
So the question is, if we're all created in God's image, back in the Garden of Eden, why did God not allow humanity to eat from the tree of knowledge if we're like God? You want it? You want me to?
So, why did God not want us to eat of that? I mean, I think we were supposed to eat of it. I think that we're not supposed to be in Eden, and we were supposed to be. There are a lot of things in our Torah that, in my mind, in reading them and some of the tradition, says that our mistakes were intentional, that were to set us on our path in a sense as well. Like, for example, Moses not being allowed to enter the promised land. Greatest prophet of all time. Why wouldn't he be allowed to keep leading us? And the reason is that it was time for new leadership. It was time. But if he were still around, people would still defer to him always. But if he just tried to step aside, it wouldn't work as well. So he had to do something so that God said, you can't enter now. And so his smashing of the commandments and his, when he hits the rock, it's a moment when he hits the rock that God says you can't go to the promised land. That's a story when the Israelites are complaining and, Miriam has just died and there's no water. And God says to Moses, yeah. And first Moses goes to God and says, I can't deal with these, the riffraff. All they do is whine all the time, parking lot Judaism. It's the worst. And so what do you, and God says, go speak to the rock and water will come forth. And Moses is so frustrated with the people of Israel that he strikes the rock instead and water comes forth. And God says, because you didn't listen to what I asked and you hit the rock and acted out of anger, you can no longer enter the promised land. What a silly, we all get frustrated. We make mistakes. Moses is human. And his response isn't so far-fetched that he's fed up with the people of Israel. And what a ridiculous reason for him not to be allowed to enter the promised land. And so the argument is that was all constructed by God and Moses so that Moses could step aside and the people of Israel would not want him there and understand that he wasn't allowed. The knowledge we're supposed to have by eating of that fruit was put there. We're human. It's like saying to a 3-year-old, don't touch this, right? Or the marshmallow test when they put the marshmallows in front of the children, how long, and then the adults leave, and how long they can stand without eating this. God knew well that we would eat of that fruit. And just because we were not, God sent a snake there to coax humanity, not just Eve, into eating of that fruit as well. And so we weren't supposed to live in this perfect place. We're supposed to God created humanity in order to have a partner to make this world better, that the world's not perfect. And so we have to figure out how to be engaged in that. And that's that divine spark that's in each of us. The idea of being created in the image of God. I always take that text in the context of the Holiness Code, which is on page 2.
Before you get to that, let me
Go ahead.
go back. I'd also say we're not God. And I think that was part of the story that we're supposed to take out of it. There's a distinction that God created us. There's something greater than us. And if we were allowed to do everything that God was able to do, then we would be too godlike, or we would be like God. And so here the message was, God created us. You have a spark of the divine within you. But even Moses, for example, Maimonides talks about the idea of gaining as much wisdom as we can, because the more wisdom we have, the more godlike we are. But there's never been a human being that has had as much knowledge as God. Moses, Rabbeinu, our greatest teacher, had the most knowledge and was the closest, and that's what we aspire to, but we can never reach that limit. Leviticus?
If I go to this other text, and then there's a question about B'Tselem Elohim, go ahead. So the question is there a stopping point with finding that divine spark in certain humans when someone is paradigmatic evil, someone like Hitler in our history? Is there still do we still believe there's a divine spark in that individual?
Yes. There's still, yeah. The tradition is there's still a divine spark with them. And I think that our prayer book today, it was either today or last night, that talks about that God doesn't want the death of sinners. The idea is God wants sinners to change their ways. And so we still see that divine spark with somebody, and we hope that somebody that is paradigmatic evil, that is doing evil things, that is hurting people, that is murdering people, whatever it is, that they eventually change so that they can find, and we can find that divine spark within them as well. But that we see every individual, no matter how great or how evil they are, that they're still a child of God.
Right. The prayer book and Santana says it really well too. So, but the idea of looking for that, and I taught this the other day. It was during Tish on Shabbat with our Torah class. The Gary Zukav's book about the soul, and that we all have personality and soul. Right? Our soul is inherently good, is always good, but some people allow personality to take over and suppress their soul. So I believe that even that evil person still has a soul, they just don't feel it. It's not influencing them. They've suppressed it so much. Personality has taken over that evil idea, and so they're led by that instead of anything else. Yeah. Another county heard from. Dr. Kopel talked about the story, the Midrash, that says God didn't want humanity to have both knowledge and immortality. So once we got knowledge, we had to give that up. Because if not, we'd be God, in a sense. And so, yeah, it's a Midrash that says that this is the reason why. Look, the beauty of tradition is that all of these opinions over time, or, as I said last night, Ein Chadash Tachat HaShamesh, there's nothing new under the sun. Anytime you think you found a new teaching, or you come up with a new idea yourself as a Jew, as a rabbi, then you find some rabbi 300 years ago taught that, or 600 years taught that, or 50 years taught that. And we say there's nothing new under the sun. The rabbis say if you have one chidush, one new idea that's an entire lifetime. That's good enough for your whole life. One new idea. Still waiting. So, but you hope for that glimmer that comes to you. Rabbi says we didn't start with something that we should have done that we always do. And it will wake some of you up right now too. So for a minute, turn around and introduce yourself to the people you're sitting around so we can be a little more of a community as well if you haven't met someone new.
And if you're online, let us know that you're here, and post your name and where you're joining us from. Now that it's working, fortunately.
So, I'm getting text messages about your sermon right now.
I am?
No, I am.
Oh.
I know your number, which is great. When you ask a question, if you'll say your name as well, so those who aren't sitting here get to meet you too. It's always nice. You know, someone said last year during Tish, I don't know if John Marjoram Lace is here right now, he had a great idea, which was we start our services by introducing ourselves to one another. We should finish our services before we go to Oneg. Sorry for mentioning that. But before we go, and do it again, because you walk out, and you know, if you're like me, you forget after an hour. But this way, you walk out together, too, talking as well. The teaching of B'Tselem Elohim, for me, was one of the most important in my life early as a rabbinical student. And I was blessed to spend an entire summer with our theme at camp as that. And when I started here, it was something I wanted to infuse into our program, our 7th and 8th grade program, why we asked Dan Nichols to write that song that we love to sing with that title, B'Tselem Elohim. But the idea of it is not image, of course, though that Tselem is image. That's why we have, you know, artwork, Christian artwork with the vision of God as like Santa Claus in a white beard and long hair on high who's reaching down and touching us. And the Jewish, and we are greatly influenced by Christianity here in this country and the world as a predominant religion. And so it infuses things. I mean, the idea of Messiah is a whole different concept because of what Christianity did than what it is inherently, originally in Judaism. And we can talk about that as well. So image for Judaism was characteristics that we can act like God. And the rabbis go through the Torah and find all the things that God clothes the naked, so we can do that. God feeds the hungry, we can do that. God comforts the mourner, we can do that. All the ideas of what we have to do. How do we act like God? B'Tselem Elohim is by behaving with goodness first. And the rabbis then take this teaching from Leviticus chapter 19, which is called the Holiness Code, which we will read in 2 hours or 3 hours here on the Bema, as how we live in the image of God. And when we think of holiness, and I always, like when a child has this for the Devar Torah, for the bar mitzvah portion, I always ask them, well, close your eyes and imagine a holy person, what that person looks like, right? And they often imagine someone like the Dalai Lama or a Hasidic Rebbe or the Pope or someone like that. And if we look at the Holiness Code, to be holy in Judaism, the first thing is you honor your mom and dad. That's number one. So tell your kids that. Really good for them to know, right? Start them young. That's every night. Just say that to them. By the way, you want to be holy? So you observe, you make Shabbat holy. You do something on Shabbat. 3, when you harvest the corners of your field, you leave them unharvested. So the widow, the orphan, the stranger can take and have food on the table and have so with dignity, right? And that law is what gives us a talis. Why we have 4 corners on our tali tot. To remind us, and the rabbi said, if you remember that one law, by looking at your talis, you'll remember all the other laws of our tradition. And that alone will lead you to then go down that road of following all the other laws as well. It says that you're honest in your weights and measures. By the way, anytime a law says don't do something in the Torah, it means some point we were doing it. So the law is about idolatry. The law is about sexual inappropriateness and why you couldn't be with your, father's sister and things like that. That's in the Torah, that law. I know. You don't want to go there. Sorry. So I'm just telling you, it's law. I won't talk about the animals. Anyway, but here it says all these ideas of what holiness is. And it's all about our human interactions, how we deal with one another, right? It's not about between you and God. It's between you and other people. How do we bring God into the world is how we treat each other, how we treat each other with seeing that spark with kindness, with love, with goodness, with that ability there. And the last law, of course, ve'ahavta re'echa kamocha, to love your neighbor as yourself. We're only told to love 3 times or 3 ways in the Torah. So we say it all the time in our services and our prayers, right? We say in the prayer, the ve'ahavta, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, right? That we love God. Love number 2 is, anyone know?
Ahava Rabbah.
Love your neighbor here, it says. It says, love your neighbor as yourself. And the stranger. You don't have to love your parents. You have to fear your parents and honor your parents. You don't have to love them. We can talk about that later too. But you have to love the stranger. That's actually said, I think, 36 times in the Torah, love the stranger. Right? Think of our world today. How well we live in that one. And how do we command the idea of loving? It's really a fascinating idea because when we think of love and what we may share in a beautiful relationship with our children, with our spouse, right? Can we command that? Right? Yeah, something innate happens when you're blessed to have children. And even when they're doing things you don't want them to be doing, you sometimes say to them, I still love you, not really liking you right now, but I will always love you, right? There's something that's eternal in that. And with a partner, with a lover, can that be commanded? Not necessarily. We create that in our lives. We work on that in our lives. But to love the stranger? So how do we love God? The rabbis say we love the stranger, we love our neighbor. And who is our neighbor as well with that in mind? So I think it's very difficult to fulfill this, but I think it's fascinating. Our tradition says, love the stranger. The stranger, and it talks about different strangers as well. The stranger who dwells with us, who's a part of our community, right? So the stranger who's with us isn't the convert necessarily, is the one who is incumbent upon them to fulfill the sacrifices included in almost all of the ritual of the community. But then the stranger who just is nearby us as well. And what do we do? And then how do we include that stranger? You know, I think that you find a lot of communities that don't appreciate how important that is. And people walk in and walk out and never come back because they don't feel a sense of warmth, of inclusion, of love. And what do we do to make sure that we include everyone? I mean, that's really what a temple should be. A mikdash is the idea of inclusion. And for us, as a Reform congregation, and we like to say we're post-denominational. We're products of the Reform movement, coming from Reform camps, Reform homes, the Reform seminary, but it doesn't matter to us what you call yourself. It's that you find comfort here. You find inclusion here. You find a sense of community here. That's what we are. So you want to pray more traditional? Sometimes we have more traditional prayers and services. You don't like that? Okay. As Rabbi Daniel has taught us, you vote with your feet. You know, you like it, then you're here. That's awesome. That's who we are.
So we brought some of these texts, but we also want to leave time for questions, and then if it lulls, we'll come back to some of these texts as well. So, Sid, want to introduce yourself? Introduce yourself first.
Wait, introduce yourself, Sid. Introduce yourself. Good job. Strong work. Well, traditionally you would pray every morning here in the synagogue, and I know I didn't see you here yesterday, Sid. So, but you wouldn't have seen me here yesterday either, so don't worry. But the idea is a traditional Jew wears a tallis every morning. And so we were...
Throughout the day.
What's that?
Not just in the morning, throughout the day.
Right. That's true, actually. But we were an agrarian community, right? We were all farmers, and so we're shepherds, and so these were rituals that you would do every day. You'd put on so a traditional Jew is not only wearing a prayer shawl in your morning prayers, but a talit katan that goes under your clothes that the tzitzit hang out. So you've seen traditional Jews who have tzitzit hanging out. The idea of those is to remind them of all of the mitzvot, but it starts traditionally the idea, the rabbi said, this commandment, that's why we have 4 corners. And it's a four-cornered garment. It's like an undershirt that drapes over, your body, and the tzitzit hang out. And I often thought, like, I should wear that because I love that constant reminder, that idea of it, of what that represents. I was once co-officiating at a funeral with an Orthodox colleague, and we were both being with the mourners, the family of mourners. And he walked in, and later on, he apologized to the family because he forgot to tuck his tzitzit in. I didn't know this tradition. The tradition is that when you're in the presence of mourners, you shouldn't be reminding them of all the commandments we have to fulfill because they're in mourning and they can't fulfill all those commandments. So it's almost, you don't want to make them feel worse in any way. So a traditional Jew, as a rabbi, should tuck his tzitzit in. He still knows they're there, right? You're wearing tzitzit not so you see them, but that I see them, right? And that's the teaching of it too. So I thought it was sort of beautiful and that humbling idea within it as well. What's the question, too?
So, yes, the question is, in the prayers that we were reading, Sid recognized that a lot of them, when we're talking to God, say, in your world, and refer to God and God's world in that way. I'm trying to think of some of the prayers as we read them. I think part of it's probably poetic, that the Al Chaitz. Because part of the tradition is it's not our world. It is the idea that the concept, there's nothing here that's ours, that we're just here for a mere blip on a screen, but that God is that everlasting presence that's always around. And it makes you think of the world in a different way, that if our possessions that we have, that we realize that they're just mere possessions, and that eventually they won't be ours, or that were they really ours to begin with. So my guess is the prayers, and I'm still trying to think where in Al Chait it could be. In the poetic translation? In the English. My guess is that's part of that concept as well. It's just that a reminder that we're only here for a short period of time, and this is really God's world, that it will continue on, that we're a mere blade of grass that is here for a little bit and eventually is no longer there.
There's actually reading in the Yisker service that says we're visitors, temporary visitors, in this world right now. And there's a teaching in Judaism that we're not supposed to ever finish our home, that you leave a corner or a part of your home unfinished. So there's two different concepts with that. One,
Joel's doing that with Project Altogether too, right? You got that.
So one is that we're temporary residents here. Right? This is not my permanent residence, and we're guests in God's world, and so my home is not finished. The other is, when we're alive, where are we supposed to live as Jews? Israel. That the Messiah should come one day, and we should all go to Israel. And so that's why we're temporary as well here. So both those teachings come out of the idea of not finishing, why our home's not finished, and that one room is not going to be done for a long time. I'm very observant and not working. Yeah, of course it is, right. But it's the idea that the Messiah has not come. And that's why it's temporary, our residency here too. We're still waiting. Well, the contemporary Judaism, we've taken prayers of messianic redemption out of our prayer book. You'll see in the new prayer book, though, it does reference it in the Tagibor, in the Givurot. So we in the Reform movement, and Rabbi Daniel always hated the line, it says at the end, it used to say, Baruch atah Adonai mechayei metim. God who brings life to the dead. So the Reform movement said that was an idea of the belief in the physical resurrection of the dead. That when the Messiah comes, we will walk with the Messiah, rising from our graves, bones, muscles, everything comes back together, and a full head of hair, and we walk back to Jerusalem together. You wouldn't recognize me. And so it's like a scene from the Thriller video, right? And just what we want. And the Reform movement said, we don't believe that. And so we took that prayer out. So they said, God who brings God brings life to everything, you know. And it sort of seems like this antiseptic kind of way that doesn't really resonate. And so why do you have to be so literal? Like, my God brings life to the dead. It's why my papa, my grandfather of blessed memory in particular, is always a part of me. Certain things, lessons, values, things he did, I think of all of the time. And, you know, in my belief, that soul God has kept alive. And so God brings life to the dead, that he is a part of who I am. And that's what that prayer means. We still say in our prayers, Mechai HaKol. We don't do Mechai Metim, but it's there. So the Reform movement, the progressive movement said, we don't believe in a personal Messiah, one person who comes and it leads the people of Israel and ends disease, you know, hunger, violence, all that. We believe in a messianic time that we will make that happen and restore this world. So,
I forget who the author is. There's a book called that goes along with that idea that we're not waiting for a personal Messiah. The title of it is "There's No Messiah, and You're It." And it's that idea of our responsibility to work together to bring about that messianic age.
Yes.
So the question is...
Thanks. Good question.
Thanks, Kathy. The question is, based on the number, Rabbi spoke about it last night as well, but the idea that our numbers are a little bit smaller than they have been in the past, pre-pandemic.
In attendance for a high holiday.
In attendance.
Services, not in membership of Temple Shir Shalom.
Yes. What is there to do about it? How do we respond? That it's a certain generation that is here, that is present. And your papa used to say that nothing changes. Say it again. It's like times change. Time changes, but the idea of life doesn't change. So I'll use that as well. How many of you were here when you were 20 or 30? Sitting in the synagogue, spending the afternoon. Some were, a lot of hands went up, some not. The idea is there's two ways that we can learn from that. One is, who are you bringing with you that's that 20 or 30-year-old that you came with your parents because it was the expectation? They set that memory trigger for you. They created that Kodak moment so that you knew this is something that I'm supposed to do. So that's part of it, is for us to be able to have these opportunities for outreach. And we've started, thanks to our board of directors, some of those opportunities with Shabbat services, where we've had special onegs that we know are a little bit more enticing because there's food involved with them. Not just a little oneg, but a nice nosh and some drinks and some other things that are part of it there. So that's one way. It's honest to try and create those programs, those opportunities to make people feel like they're a part of a community. Rabbi mentioned last night the idea of chavarahs. When people come, and we talk about this with our religious school program, with our teachers as we're training them for the year and talking about what we want to create there, we want our kids to have relationships. That we know that if they have a relationship with a peer, with their teachers, with the teaching assistants that are in the classroom, that somebody knows their name and welcomes them when they walk in the door and they use their name, that they feel part of the community and that they feel recognized and they feel important. That if you walk into a place and, as Rabbi was talking about, welcoming strangers or the lack of welcoming strangers, that you don't feel a part of the community, that somebody doesn't notice that you're not there and doesn't then follow up with you later on to say, hey, I missed you, is everything okay? That you don't feel a part of a community. And therefore you don't feel that responsibility to go in the future, to be a part of it. So I think that's part of it, is us making sure that we build those small communities within our larger community so that people are engaged. I think the other piece is 20 and 30-year-olds, it's not new that they don't feel part of organized religion. I think there's a piece of it that age range, they're exploring, they're figuring things out. They're taking those traditions that their parents, grandparents, others shared with them and figuring out, how am I going to incorporate this into my life? Do I really need to go? And some of them will say, I missed something in my life because somebody made it important for me. And some will say, oh, this is pretty easy. And unfortunately, they won't connect in that way. Our goal is to try and figure out, our responsibility is to try and figure out, how do we make it something that they want to connect to? So for those 20 and 30-year-olds that you have, Wednesday night, we have a sukkah building program for them. If you haven't seen that and you want me to get in touch with a child, let me know, because we want to recruit, and that's how we're going to keep them involved. And it becomes the expectation that when we reach out to them, when they get that personal invitation at times, it's rare that people say no, that they want to be a part of it and they feel special. And that's the way to get them involved in the community as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So Kathy continued her question with, how do we connect people virtually, our children who live away from here, they're not at their synagogue, how can we do that?
I'll be honest, I don't want to connect them virtually. I want to connect them with a synagogue where they are. I want them to find a place that they're going to go, that they're going to meet, they're going to build community there, they're going to have their rabbi that is going to be there for their life cycle events, for their simchas, for their challenges. I love that they're connected here. I want our kids to stay connected. It's an honor to be able to officiate and to be able to celebrate with people. But at some point, for synagogues to be able to survive and for communities to be able to be built upon, it has to be with the people that you're around. They have to be able to say, hey, I'm going to Shabbat dinner, come along with me.
I mean, it's the relationship piece, the connections. And it becomes our safe zone. And so I saw kids 25, 26, 27 online during services. As I was driving over here from West Bloomfield High School, I pulled up the YouTube link to see what was going on in services, and then I saw the chat, and it was interesting seeing some people who are there, who are young people who are watching services. But I agree with what Rabbi said. You know, we have something that's special here, but we're only here right now. Look, we're happy to do our classes hybrid so people can connect in other places too. We have our Introduction to Judaism class, and we have couples who are marrying who live out of town, but they're taking it with us. They're not in person. Okay, but it's always better, you know, when we're more connected physically in this way as well. That being said, we had similar numbers to here over at West Bloomfield High School. About 400 people were over at West Bloomfield High School, families. And it was a pretty cool feeling. I was listening to our youth group president speak and give her Devar Torah for the meaning of this day. And Bruce Gorman's nodding, and she did a beautiful job. Charlotte Brager did. It was really nice. And everyone was engaged, but I was looking around, thinking, like, how do we make sure these children, who are all here now, these little kids, come and continue on after Bar and Bat Mitzvah and stay a part of our high school program, which I think is a great success, with the kids going to Israel with us and all the things we do there. And I looked around and I saw all these parents, like your kids, who are in our high school, who are now parents with their elementary school children at the service. About a dozen parents who are there, who graduated in 98 and 99 and 2001, 2002, so it's that relationship piece. They feel this connection. They're in town here, and they're benefiting from that. So it works, and it's that continuing of it. We have something special. But I think we need to do more, and it's programming, it's connecting with people where they are. It's being outside of our synagogue and going to people's homes. And anyway, we started doing things in the pandemic that we'd never done before. And so when Alan Goodis was here, and we had some people, we did a service here, we did the Oneg outside, but we did a traveling Havdalah service. And we did it in 3 different people's homes in their backyards. One in Huntington Woods, one in Farmington Hills, and one in West Bloomfield. And it was great. And we had, 40 people at this one, and we had 20 people at this one, and we had 15 at that one. It was just nice connections. And so now, the challenge is we have 1 cantor and 2 rabbis. And so it's really inspiring others to help us lead with that and do that, because there's only so many hours in a day, as much as we do and want to keep doing too. So that's why you can ask, what's our 3, 5, 10-year vision for Temple? And we can tell you about that as well. But having an additional colleague here with us is part of that plan. So, introduce yourself, Ken Jacobs.
Ken Jacobs.
Good job. He's 1 for 1 right now.
I've been a member of the Bank for 20, 25 years. And when we first opened this building and we would come in, it was hard to find us for the others. If you take all the people that were watching online last night and today, and over at the youth service, where my wife was with their grandkids, I'm part of the family, you put everyone in. So I don't think glass is half full, that what this congregation is doing is right. And that it's not as bleak as some people may want to make it out to be. Because we are growing. And if you look at numbers this way of estimating success, I think our numbers are far higher today than they were 20 years ago.
So Ken's comment is that if we tallied up all our numbers with the number of people watching our holiday service online, so let's say there were 200 screens watching during the service, plus the 500 who are here, we actually have more than we had, 15 years ago. And then obviously we intentionally do the youth service, the family service at the same time, so that it does, split our congregation so we can fit more people. We have parking for everyone in that way too. So that's intentional as well. I also think when we used to do youth service, when your daughter was youth group president and we did youth service at 3 p.m, it was a difficult time for families. And we had both the Pitzla service and it was, remember how crazy it was trying to run between both those services. And Daniel and I would run back and forth and you'd hear the social hall noise bleeding into the sanctuary. This way works better. So I agree with you to an extent. I still think, and I'm glad we offer our services online. We're not, some synagogues have stopped doing that. That's saying like the mitzvah is to be here in person. We will always offer our services online from now on because we know there are people who can't get out of their home, right? They don't have the opportunity to. They're not physically able to. And there's a beautiful story. With your mom, I'm thinking of Sharon Meisel, a blessed memory. And, when Sharon was in assisted living, and then they would broadcast our service on the big screen at Provisions. And she'd go down, and we were the movie. Imagine that. And then when she couldn't leave her room, you and your sisters would come after work, have a glass of wine, enjoy services with your mom. And that, makes me feel so good about something we could provide that we didn't before we had this technology. And we've only gotten better at that. We're not experts at it. We're still figuring it out. And so I feel very fortunate that we've been able to do that. And we will. And I'm glad that we connect that my kids, go online and watch our service, or so they say they do, and make me feel good, But that, they connect that way too, and we can, but I still think there's something about coming together physically as a community. And seeing, and I will say these high holidays have actually felt good because more of us have chosen to do it than the previous 3 years, obviously, or 2 years. We couldn't 3 years ago. And that there's something that's very special in that, and we need that connection with each other too. Cindy, introduce yourself. It depends where you live too. Right.
Yeah, so hi, Evan. Watching from Wisconsin. So Cindy was talking about her experience, and for Rosh Hashanah, she and Daryl were out of state visiting their son and going to another synagogue where they had tickets for the Erev Rosh Hashanah and the day of, but decided to join us for the day of so that she could be with, I'm going to use your words, our people, your community, as you were doing things. And talking about with our younger generation that oftentimes people don't want to put themselves out there, and it's difficult to do that. And so taking a friend, Jewish, non-Jewish, to go with you for that first time is kind of that safety blanket, is a good thing to be able to help out. So yes, those are all great ways, and I think that's part of it. Part of our responsibility as a community is try to figure out different ways that we can have different entrees into Jewish life. And I think that's the great thing about our community, whether there's programming here at Temple, but the broader Jewish community has great things as well. You mentioned for some places when you're going to reach out to the different college Jewish communities, Hillel, Chabad. Oftentimes organizations will have like a Young Jewish Professionals. The federations have Young Jewish Professionals. Next Gen here in town. They do a lot of different programming to kind of give that first step into the programming, and that way you build your community and you figure out where you go from there. So our hope is to be able to do that too, and to create those opportunities and to welcome not just our young adults, but young adults who have moved to our community. And I think that's what I've heard many years. One of the blessings of Temple is being a new congregation, that we have a lot of members who didn't grow up here in town, that there's not that hierarchy in a sense that I'm going to be the next president because my mother or my father was the president at one point. That at Temple, if you want to get involved with something...
18-year process here.
If you want to get involved with something that you have an idea, Cindy, like you and Daryl with the Eucharinites, you say, I want to do something for Temple. And you put on these social gatherings, these evenings to be able to do that. That anybody here, you have something that you're interested, that you're passionate about, that you want to bring that to Temple, we'd love to explore that with you and help fulfill our mission in that way. I would say those other parts are religious parts too. So the question is, how do we get those who are interested in the social gatherings, the cultural events, how do you get them involved in the religious aspect as well? 30s.
But they go in Chapel Hill, or where do they live? Oh, they live in Commerce now. Okay. Steph, the one in North Carolina is more observed. Okay. You know, ironically, part of that is, Jews who live in smaller towns, smaller Jewish communities, almost always affiliate because there's no Jews around, and so you need that right? There's that community bond. We're lucky. We have a high affiliation still in Metro Detroit, but you can still be a Jew without belonging, right? I mean, what city has the least affiliation is New York City, right? Because there's bagels on every street corner. You don't have to belong to a synagogue, which is a lot of irony in that too. Anyway, you were saying.
I'd say some of those aspects are religious. That even if it's a cultural event, that people come and find meaning in different things. There's the joke that there's a gentleman that goes to synagogue every week, and his wife asks him, his name's Isaac, he says, Isaac, every Shabbat, you go there Friday nights, I'm home, cooking, getting ready for Shabbat dinner. Why do you go? And he says, my friend Shmuel, he loves to pray. He goes, he loves praying to God, has that phone conversation, that one-way call that he has to God, and he's sitting there and he's davening, he's fervently praying, and he's enjoying it. That's great for Shmuel, but why do you go? He says, I like talking to Shmuel. Everybody goes for different reasons, comes to synagogues. That's my warning this time. If you come for a cultural event, you come for Purim, you're enjoying the Purim carnival. At some point, hopefully, our goal is that you find that other aspect too. That we oftentimes refer to things as backdoor Judaism. That you come for one thing that excites you, but you're going to learn about other things that hopefully entice you as well. That's the goal. That's the first step, is those cultural events that eventually, hopefully, they find meaning in and it continues on. But we also try to figure out, how do we now take that next step and help them in that next step too. Elson, bring her a special oneg. The food is enticing.
Cocktails.
My alarm going off, by the way, it's a 10-minute warning for us.
Oh, wow. Time flies. So, I mean, look, we need to find ways to always bring people in, but it's also depending on people's comfort zone and understanding. And so, I think personally that intermarriage is an opportunity for growth for us, right? It's not something that necessarily hurts us. That when we do that right and we are able to welcome. But it depends on the Jewish person's perspective and their affinity and desire to be part of our community. I often have non-Jews who want to be a part of it, but their Jewish spouse has such a distaste for our faith that it's not going to happen, right? And we've done a disservice by turning our children away. As Rabbi Schwartz will tell us, that our religious schools, not Shir Shaloms, but religious schools like the one I was kicked out of, the biggest boon for anti-Semitism and self-hating Jews than anything else, right? So how many of us had a less than positive religious school experience growing up? So, and I had some good moments too when I was allowed back in, but the idea of, it starts with what we give our children, and so us creating quality experiences for children and that's why I feel so proud and looking out in our youth service and seeing these parents of young children now and what that means. So yeah, I think as far as identity goes, those who go to Jewish camp, who have a Jewish camping experience, those who go to Israel as teens, and then also our homes. Those are the three things that are biggest influences in our Jewish identity. So there's no doubt that our children feel that when they come home from camp and what they experience in those times and how important it is for us. And that's why we are part of a number of Jewish camps. And, Rabbi just finished a term on the Tamarack board, and we have so many of our kids go to Tamarack. The Reform Movement Camp, Goldman Union Camp in Zionsville, Indiana. Both these camps we spend time at because we believe in that mission of living Judaism, of what that happens there. I'm feeling good about that. So.
Oh, we got time, yeah.
Who is that back there? Can't see in your mask.
Wendy, pass her.
Oh, is it Wendy? Okay. So the question is, what about facilitating ways that congregants can meet other congregants who are facing similar experiences or similar challenges? And you gave the example of people going through cancer. So we haven't had a cancer support group or a conversation in a while. We did that in conjunction with National Council of Jewish Women a few years ago. But there's no reason why we couldn't make that happen if people wanted to see that, and we'd be happy to. Just as we're starting up a support group for parents who've lost a child. And that came from two parents who met with us and said, we'd like to talk to other parents and have that. Could we help facilitate that? We said, of course. Obviously, it's a small group, but we have 6 people who are signed up for that right now. That's starting next month. And so I'm glad as a congregation we can help do that. So yeah, groups like that for support in challenging times I think are very worthwhile, and that's part of the support a congregation can provide. Look, our vision is to have a social worker on our staff that can help with these kind of things so we can do more of that. Our vision is to have a program director. Our vision is to have another rabbi with us too, because this is exactly the kind of things we want to facilitate and to bring people together to be that for all ages. You know, the well started 7 years ago or so in our community, which was the vision of that Jews meet in the Bible. You know, where did you meet? You met at the well, right? And so it was young adult group. And I don't know if it's 25 to 40 is what they say, or if they do.
They get everybody every age.
It was funded by Temple Israel, and there's been 2 rabbis, been the executive director. Rabbi Jeff Stombaugh is the executive director right now of that. And it's sort of they don't do high holiday services. They do a sukkah decorating. They do like themed things of getting together. So they do them around the 3 pilgrimage festivals. I met with the well to do when they were having a small fundraiser at a bar. It was a bar night. So shocking. When do you meet 28-year-olds? And that I would volunteer to go that night. But the idea was, it was how can we engage outside of synagogue to connect? And so it makes sense, right? They don't want to be, their vision is to push them into synagogues. So they ask us to do teaching for them and with them. And so, we were interviewed for different podcasts of teaching and getting ready for the holidays to connect with our people. So we have members of our congregation, young adults in their 30s and 20s, who go to well events and are members of Temple. Okay. It's, we only have so much time. I wish we could do more of that too, though. So that's why Rabbi said, let's do a young adult sukkah decorating, and we'll decorate a sukkah here too. So that's great. So I appreciate that idea, so we'll talk. And if others have different affinity, things like that too, let us know, because we'd want to. Yes.
I'll make this the last question.
So we mentioned we're going to talk about Israel, or we were thinking of that, and would we share our thoughts on what's going on currently in Israel and the challenges with that as well.
Our hope. I think Rabbi started our last Tish talking about 4 things that we're going to be asked when we get to the world to come. And did we have hope? And so there's always hope for Israel. Right now there's some challenging times as they're trying to figure out how to be a democratic Jewish state and make sure that everybody, as the Declaration of Independence talked about, that every citizen, regardless of their religion, regardless of all sorts of other things, that they're treated equally. And right now, unfortunately, there have been a lot of challenges with the current government, but it actually goes back for years, but more so that we're seeing it now where that's not the case. I lend my support to those who are out there protesting in the streets, who every Saturday night, Motzei Shabbat, that they're out there in every major city that are still calling out the government and saying that we need to do better and that we shouldn't be getting rid of the checks and balances system that we have with the Supreme Court, that we should be making sure that everybody has rights here. It doesn't matter if they're part of the LGBT community, if they're straight, whatever their religion might be, whatever their nationality might be. And so there's a lot of work to be done. And I think the best thing that we can do is probably figure out different organizations within Israel that we support and let them know that our voices are heard through some of the dollars that we donate, to be able to help out and make sure that the vision that we see of what Israel should be and can be, that we're supporting that.
So last year, Alan was on a trip with me to Israel and was wrestling, and a number of other members were with us too. But before we left, some were thinking maybe we won't go to Israel. And I think someone pulled off the trip because of the current political crisis and the state of affairs in Israel. There's always people who say, oh my God, it's not safe, I can't go to Israel. And we say, safe. It's fine. We go every year, and we're blessed to bring trips of you all to Israel. Rabbi's got a trip in December going, December of 24 of families. We had 11 families from Shir Shalom go with us in last December, and that's awesome that we do that, and that's part of who we are in that connection. So I'll say, what I'm going to say, my support for Israel does not waver. That being the case, I'm greatly concerned about, and I agree with everything Rabbi Daniel said about Israel's government today and what Netanyahu's doing. And, I think the judiciary reform is wrong, that a constitution should be created. Do you know Menachem Begin, right? The former prime minister of Israel, the one responsible for blowing up the King David Hotel, who was, Yitzhak Rabin's arch enemy in politics. Menachem Begin said when Israel was founded, we need to have a constitution. David Ben-Gurion says, no, let's not do that yet. David Ben-Gurion, our hero, who we think is perfect, right? David Ben-Gurion says we shouldn't do that yet. It will take too long. Menachem Begin says if we don't have a constitution, zealots will gain control of our government. Menachem Begin was the right wing. He said zealots will gain control of our government. 13% of the population of Israel voted for the current government. The vast majority are on the side with the protesters. And that's what gives me hope, that 39 weeks in a row, on Saturday night, we've had protests in Israel. And we were privileged. We went to those protests. I did when I was there in March. I wanted to go in July when we were there too, but I was with teens and they wouldn't let us go because the protests are safe. I mean, for the most part, the amazing thing about going to these protests is that you see people out there who are like us, young individuals. You see young families, you see gay couples, you see Orthodox families. It's like this amazing cross-section of Israel, as opposed to the leadership in the government right now who are racists, who are, what did Itamar Ben-Gvir say in going to Sheikh Jarrah, that we should carry our guns and let the Arabs know who we are and that we control everything. Things that their lives don't count. But they feel the same way about the LGBTQ community. They feel the same way about Reform Jews. So the majority of people who live in Israel don't agree with this government. Now, we have challenges. And so some of it's going to the courts, and we'll make our voice heard. What I like about Israel is that Israel's honest with its history. I haven't seen the movie Golda yet. I've been told it's good. Rabbi has. But what it does is it's Israeli. It shows you that Israel's being honest with its Golda Meir made great mistakes 50 years ago today in the Yom Kippur War, leading up. So knowing history, Israel tells a story, of course, that the Yom Kippur War. How many of us remember being in synagogue on Yom Kippur? I was 5 years old, right? And I remember my rabbi running off the bima back to his radio to bring back reports, about what was happening as Israel was attacked. Evil Arab nations have attacked our homeland, have attacked the good Jews, and caught us off guard. Thousands were killed in those first days, right, of Jews. And, of course, we know what happened and how, and it took 3 weeks, but Israel won that war. But that's not the real history of it. The real history is that Israel had hubris. Israel, after 67, thought, there's no problems. Like, we're great. Look what we did in 6 days. We have nothing to worry about. Didn't listen to its intelligence reports. Didn't turn on the radios that were secret radios in Egypt that could have given them information because they were afraid if they turn them on, Egypt will know we're doing, covert ops and that we've infiltrated. So did so many things wrong. But Israel's honest. They did a commission right after the 73 war and found the authorities, military and governmental, responsible and had to resign because of that. I give Israel a lot of credit for doing that and being honest with history. I don't think we have. What are we saying in our schools now? Like, well, slavery wasn't that bad because black people learned some trades during, slaves. Like, it's not being honest with our history. Israel is. That gives me hope as well. But it also means we can be critical of Israel and still love Israel and support Israel. So my donations are going to liberal organizations, Reform Movement Israel, Women at the Wall, organizations that I believe share the values that we have as a community that will help Israel move forward in that too. So with that in mind, at 2 o'clock, we begin our meditation services. Diane Buffalin has given up her time. Oh, there's Diane. And so we have the library chapel set upstairs for that. And we'll take a 5-minute break.
2 minutes.
What's that?
2 minutes.
2-minute break. We'll start upstairs with Diane. We have musicians up there too. You can go there and just fall asleep with the beautiful music and voice of Matthew Steyer and with David Reinhardt playing the keyboard there. And Diane leading us in meditation as well. If you want to just relax or go to sit in the garden, fine too. Our Pitzela service will begin here in 55 minutes in this room as well.
Elevators back there, it is working. The stairs up here also take you up to the library for those of you who'd like to do that and want the shortcut. So,
thank you, everyone. Great questions. Really appreciate